He could work out a book in a way that would be understandable, non-contradictory, and could get the message part and get the message out there, I should say. But this is the other big problem, and I don't want to get on to this whole subject because I want to keep staying with Job. But like the fact that he would give his message to all mankind to people thousands of years ago that were barely literate, that understood almost nothing about the world around them, in which it would have to be translated, passed by word of mouth, and then eventually put into books, and then expect people to understand him or come to him. That's part of the ridiculousness, in my opinion, of the whole religion. Like if I, as a human being who's flawed and not a very smart man, everybody, right? Like as my wife would say, but I got some talents. But if I can figure out a strategy in which I can communicate with humans to get my message across in my head, there's no excuse why God can't. Like if he would just show up, like and be like, hey, Scholar Fiction, I'm over here tonight. Let's talk a little bit, have a little bit of a relationship, right? Things would be all good. Then I would know he's there. I could talk to him. He could guide me. He could help me. I could gain some spirituality. But what I'm left with is reading a book that's thousands of years old, written from a culture that was very different and violent and harmful to each other, and then translated multiple languages. And then at the best, I guess Christians might say I could pray and he'll answer those prayers and give me understanding. But it's ironic because so many Christians have different beliefs and different understandings of everything. It's not coherent. People believe people debate over the Trinity, over free will, whether God preordains people to heaven or hell. Some people don't even believe in hell. Some people in different kinds of hell. Like there's so many different ways to view the religion. There's not even a clear standard to which we could choose. So that's how, I know it's a long-winded way to say that, but that's how I would be able to look at if God was trying to send a message and help us understand him or have a relationship with us, how at least it wouldn't contradict itself on every level.
So, Skylar, would you say that your exegetical understanding of the Bible being contradictory, so taking 1 Corinthians 13 back into Judges or something, that you're exegeting, so you've said the scriptures don't make any sense, and then you've sort of said that they seem contradictory and God would be more clear than he is in what we have. But there's two things I've noticed. One is that you've articulated the gospel message very clearly. I think there is a way that it can be understood, and you do seem to understand it. But my bigger question would be, you must be thinking that you're exegeting the text properly if you know they're contrary to themselves. In other words, it seems like all Christians are goofed up about everything and we're confused, but then the skeptical position seems to be exegetically the default in terms of, this is really what it means. It's full of contrary errors and things like that. So are you suggesting that is the proper way to look at the text?
You make a good point, right? Yeah. Oh, please. No, please, Dr. Josh, please.
Or Dr. Bowen.
I mean, this is sort of what I was alluding to earlier is this idea that when you're in, and I feel very qualified is not the word I'm searching for, but I can't think of a better one. I feel okay maybe about saying this because I was a Bible believing fundamentalist, conservative, evangelical Christian for almost 30 years, and so I feel like I've been very clearly well entrenched on both sides of this issue. And one of the things that I see, particularly looking back, is that if there's a possible answer, that's all that's really necessary. So, for example, I'm doing a video now, putting it together on the formation of the Pentateuch or the Hexateuch, whatever you want to call it, whatever it is that you want to think about it. But of the the early portions of the biblical text, let's just say the Pentateuch for fun. There's just no question. I just don't think there's any question that you have a very complicated, complex, and chronologically lengthy, at least somewhat lengthy, editorial and redactionary process that went into putting the Pentateuch together, right? And I don't think that Moses really had much of anything to do with it, if Moses existed. Now, one of the things that I see now, and I remember doing it when I was a Christian, is looking at these contradictions, for example, in the book of Genesis, or doublets in the book of Genesis, or stories in the text that anticipate other things that are contradictory to other things. And so these problems with the text from a literary standpoint, even from a logical standpoint, the naming of a particular place 2 different times in 2 different ways by 2 different people, and having that be the way that the name was changed, or sometimes by the same person. So these things that I think that if we took them out of the Bible and we put them into Enuma Elish, for example, into the story of Marduk and his enthronement, if we put those doublets, if we put those contradictions in Enuma Elish, I doubt any Christian would have any problem agreeing, well, yeah, those 2 things contradict one another. And if somebody said that believed in Marduk, part of the Mesopotamian religion, said, no, we can explain these doublets actually because Marduk here is using this old phrase, and it's possible that what he's referring to is, and in his mind, it makes sense. We would look at that and say, yeah, okay, that's possible, but I mean, you have 60 of these, right? So are we going with the possible 60 different times? That's what I see happening in a biblical text. Again, I did it, right? So, I'm as guilty of this as anybody. Because if there is a possible explanation, then that's all that's really necessary. We go with that, and then we say, look, there is no contradiction because it's possible that this is true. I see this a lot with, and then I'll be quiet, sorry. Sometimes I realize how long I'm speaking, but not to the end of that. Something like Ezekiel 26, right? Ezekiel 26 and the prophecy against Tyre. The text clearly talks about Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is the lone agent. That's it. And Ezekiel gets it wrong. And I don't think that's a huge problem. I don't even think that's a huge problem for someone like my wife who wants to be a Christian, because I just don't think that's relevant to her belief structure.
Do you think, just a thought on that 26, are you talking about, do you distinguish between the mainland and the mainland of Tyre and the siege mound that was built later by Alexander?
Yeah, so Alexander's not in Ezekiel 26 at all.
No, I mean in terms of, I'm assuming your error is the actual. You're thinking of the actual location of Tyre in that prophecy.
No, so the islands. I've got a video that I just did on this on our channel. Please check it out. But no, the island city of Tyre is the subject of destruction that Nebuchadnezzar is supposed to bring, and he doesn't. And he says it in Ezekiel 29. I mean, I won't go into the details here, but I mean, there's from in my opinion and mainstream scholarship's position, that there is no Alexander in the text, right? There's not this hidden, many nations are going to come up against you, and that somehow refers to later nations, or a switch in pronouns in verse 12. You can watch my video, and I go into that in great detail. But nonetheless, let's assume just for what I'm saying here, Ezekiel 26 it's just for better or for worse a failed prophecy, right? But because people come to that text and say, well, isn't it possible that this grammatical structure shifting here, isn't it possible that it's referring later, 240 or whatever years later, to Alexander coming? Isn't that possible? Well, no, I don't think so. But let's say that it is possible. Are we going with what's possible or what's highly plausible, and doesn't require, I don't want to say tap dancing, but I mean exegetical shifting to a high degree, reading things into the text that just simply aren't there. That's the problem that I see.
Is it?
Sorry.
No, you're fine. I appreciate the input. I just went through Ezekiel a couple months ago. The information historically. So you believe in the Amarna letters, Dr. Bone? I mean, you know what those are, right? Between the Hittites and Egypt and 18th dynasty.
Yes, translated a number of them.
So are you familiar with the correspondence between, I can never pronounce his name, Suppalumina, how you pronounce it, the stupid name. Not
Suppiluliuma.
stupid, but yeah, Suppiluliuma. The correspondence between him and what scholars apparently believe is King Tut's widow. Are you familiar with that letter?
Sure. I mean, the Amarna period. Sorry, the Amarna period is 14th century, 13th century. So,
yeah, right. So,
okay.
But are you familiar with the exchange between him and Queen Tut? Or the alleged
I don't know
exchange?
The particular letter that you're describing. Go ahead.
Okay, so there's an interpretive context. They're not the pharaoh whose sudden death has led to this request is called the Neferuria. If I'm killing that, we don't get Tutankhamun out of that. My point with this is that there's historical speculation that the person writing this particular letter was the widow of King Tut. But what we don't, so if like a layman's reading this, I mean, I'm a layman and I read it. There's a great deal of scholarship that goes into thinking that this name is particularly related to this person, or a lot of place names like that, or a lot of chronology is like that, to where we are filling in the gaps anachronistically from a modern contextual standpoint. I'm not saying that the Amarna letter author was Queen Tut or the pharaoh's wife, but the Amarna letter that describes, she's asking for the hand in marriage of one of the Hittite princes. Prior to this letter, the Hittites and the Egyptians had been, at loggerheads, combatively. And essentially, she's trying to make peace because something has happened to her. Her husband is dead. We don't know what happened, but she's trying to make peace. And so the king can't believe this. He sends an emissary. It's true. One prince makes his way over to Egypt, and he's killed along the way. We don't have all the details. We have some text here from the Amarna letter, a particular Amarna letter, but we are left with having to fill in the details. And so it's not like Scripture or any ancient text, I think, gives us the full and comprehensive story that we would like. Empirically speaking, is like astronomy. We're looking back at the ancient world in pieces. But we don't have the whole context. And so I think that possibility, my whole point with this is that possibility exists on both sides, Dr. Bowen. It seems like you have a possible way in which this probably was not fulfilled. And, exegetical evangelical scholars have possibilities as well. And the reason those exist for both of us is because we do not have all the contextual archaeological details of the context in which these things happen.
Yeah, so I'm going to push back on you a little bit. There's a difference between not having all of the details to know about every facet of a historical event. It would be amazing if we had that, right?
Great. Yay, that's great.
Yeah, I mean, but we don't, right?
Right.
And one of the things that we see from the ancient Near East is that instead of having what we might consider to be like a broad, oh gosh, I keep turning Siri on when I say something about the ancient Near East. What we don't have is oftentimes sort of this broad light that illuminates a period. We have, a very fine, bright light that illuminates certain parts in certain places, right? We have an archive that we find, something like the Amarna period. We know a fair amount about the Amarna period.
Sure. Yeah, I'm not saying that.
Yeah. No, I know you're not. But, something like a prophecy in Ezekiel, right, where Ezekiel is giving very specific detail about what's going to happen, right? If you want to argue that it's hyperbolic language, I have no problem with that, right? But the essential nature of that text, the essential point of that prophecy, if prophecy means anything, and Robert Chisholm in his 2010 article cites this, cites is not the right word. He not confesses, he admits is the word that I'm searching for. That even if it's hyperbolic language, essentially the prophecy fails, right? And what I'm saying is that from a historian, somebody that works with ancient texts, even though I'm much more on a literary side and a liturgical side, somebody that works in the ancient world that deals with these texts and tries to piece together the historical periods, based on the knowledge that we have archaeologically, art historically, contextually, or textually,